Aleister! If you're here, come forward. Aleister, if that is you in the shadows, make yourself known. We're currently stood in a circle surrounding the symbol on the floor. Draw your power and speak into this device.
Check us one of the cameras if you want. Check us one of the cameras. Yeah, that sounded like it. That is nuts. That is weird.
Exactly like he said.
Crowley, that's a very unusual name to get out of a spirit box.
This is episode 6 of One Dark Night.
We've abandoned the car because we've literally run out of road. The dirt track we're on has come to an end, and we've come deep into the Cornish landscape to find an abandoned mine, because here somewhere is a shack that belongs to a local folklorist who spent years researching the stories and figures that haunt this part of Cornwall. Of course, one of those people is the man at the heart of our story, the person who is infamous in this part of the world, Aleister Crowley. And there are rumours and stories about him to this day. So what we're hoping is that our folklorist can help us discover what Crowley was doing here in Cornwall and why he provokes such a strong reaction from the people that live here.
I am a folklorist, and my specific interest is Cornish folklore and magical traditions in Cornish folklore. In my teens, I got a very... Hang on, I'm going to walk across, I'm going to show you the book. It's absolutely fantastic.
Steve Patterson's shack is full of wood carvings and electronic equipment for his podcast.
My grandmother gave me some...
And the shelves that run along one wall are groaning with books.
When I was very young. And there we go. I've got this Folklore, Myths and Legends of Britain.
Oh, that looks like beautiful.
Reader's Digest.
Perfect.
And it's a fantastic book. And this book is amazing. So many people pull this book up and say, this is the book that got me into folklore.
Do you know what? So did I.
Hey, there you go. There you go. No, so many people have. But the wonderful thing about this book is it's full of fantastic illustrations.
It is.
But it's divided up into different locations, and it's got maps in it.
Yep.
And they made a massive change. I think this book changed the way we look at folklore, because it suddenly connected folklore with place.
Yes.
Also there on one of the shelves is a copy of the Tregurthan Horror by Paul Newman. You'll remember that this is the account that Graham and I discovered, and which claims to reveal what happened that night at the cottage.
I met Paul Newman, so sadly no longer with us. And, you know, one of the things he said was that when he was collecting these stories about Crowley, in all his years of journalism, he never, ever came across anyone who people got so hot under the collar about.
No.
There's all these stories about Crowley down here, and they're not just casual stories, they're stories that people are still very much engaged with.
Very much so. Yeah,
which is really interesting, which makes me, as a folklorist, think, well, we're not talking about a historical character. We're talking about almost like a mythological construct of Crowley, who was down here. And it's almost this idea that Crowley somehow imbues a sense of otherness and a sense of dark magic into the landscape wherever he goes. We hear stories about him, Men and Toll, don't we? And it's always interesting. There's very specific points. I don't know of any other prehistoric places he's been associated with. Only Men and Toll.
Only Men and,
Right, Men and Toll is in West Penwith. It's a prehistoric site. It's it consists of 2 upright stones and a slab in the centre with a large hole in the middle. It's a very odd prehistoric site. It's out on its own. There's no similar places like it. A very magical, very numinous place.
And there's kind of stories associated with it, like if you climb through it in a certain direction,
right.
full moon or
Yeah.
whatever.
These stories were again collected by Bottrell Hunt in the 19th century. They were supposed to be healing circles, and children would pass through the hole in the centre of this stone, and it was I think it was said to be said to heal rickets, I think, amongst other diseases. But it was very ritualistic the way it's done. It had to be so many. You had to be passed so many times through the hole in a very particular direction. So we get this very interesting connection of healing virtues, a prehistoric site, and a ritualistic act that goes with it.
Yeah.
The stories are that basically he went there and he did some kind of ritual.
Yeah.
This is the interesting thing. No specifics
Nobody
at
knows.
all.
No.
But nevertheless, it's just connecting this mythological figure of Crowley with this place.
Yes.
But yeah, so Crowley's connected with it. Stories of Crowley doing black masses in Burien Church.
Oh, not come across that one.
Oh,
before.
yeah, no, that's quite a common one. It's interesting. Burien Church is actually right in the middle of the village.
Yeah,
It's
so-
extremely unlikely that such a thing would happen. But again, sort of Burien Church, very numinous place.
So that story, the Paul Newman's version of events, he didn't tell you at all where he might have got that from.
No,
No.
he didn't. No.
So, I mean, that's the great mystery here, if you like, where the story, which has persisted, originated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that is a big question, isn't it?
And from a folklorist point of view, that must be what you struggle with all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, how do you trace the origins of something? But you're usually
Yeah.
looking at things that are
But sometimes,
hundreds of years older.
So the origin sometimes isn't the most interesting and defining feature of a story. Sometimes it's how this story grows and changes and morphs, and the influence it has on people's lives. This is maybe the interesting part of the whole story.
Yeah.
But there's always the intriguing thing when looking at someone like Crowley. Okay, there's this folkloric Crowley who's clearly a very real presence in Cornwall.
Yeah.
But there could be a historical side
could
to
well
it
be.
as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that, Pat Doherty lived down here makes you think he must have had some kind of connection
sure.
with down there. He must have been coming and going at some stage.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not far from Zenner
Oh, no, not at all.
across to Penzance.
Not
or
at all.
Paul, you know, no distance.
No, and of course there are again stories of Crowley round Lamorna as well. Again, not specific stories, just stories of his presence round there.
I mean, inevitably, what we're doing with this aspect of this podcast is contributing to this myth,
Oh yeah,
which was never our intention, but we are doing so.
but that's the crazy thing about folklore, isn't it? It's for the particle physicists. They realised that when they were looking at particles, they were affecting it because they were realising that they themselves are made of particles, and you can't separate. Folklore's exactly the same. You can't separate yourself. As soon as you start looking at it, you suddenly become part of this weird, crazy folkloric continuum.
Yes, you do. It's remarkable, and this feels like a new, almost like a potentially new folk story emerging. Of the great beast in Cornwall.
And so we get these stories of this mythical character of Crowley moving round Cornwall, visiting these places, and somehow leaving this essence, like I said, of otherness and dark magic wherever he goes.
Before we leave, Steve mentioned something, almost in passing. It's about someone who lived down here in Cornwall and who devoted a chapter in one of her books to Aleister Crowley.
The same thing applies to the folklore down here. I think there's something inherently in the land.
Yeah.
The occultist and surrealist artist Ethel Cahoon, she was very aware of this kind of magic in the landscape, and it's what drew her down here. And in her book, The Living Stones of Cornwall, she devotes a chapter to Crowley being down here. In her chapter in a book where she writes about him, she does talk mainly about just about the story about him being down here.
What we've been saying, really.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Now, she wanted to join the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was of course the organisation that Crowley was involved with, but they wouldn't have her.
Oh.
So she went off and joined a number of other esoteric groups, most of which were of a Thelemic, Crowley-esque slant.
Ethel Cahoon is not someone I'm familiar with. Let me just have a look at my phone. So according to the Tape website, she was obviously an artist, and this is interesting. She joined the British Surrealist movement, and she had a lifelong preoccupation with magic.
There you go then.
Switch this off. Sorry, darling, we're recording.
Okay, I'm just going down to Waiting Trust and I've come home.
Okay. See you back there. Bye. Do you need anything from Waitrose?
No.
You sure? Okay. Still recording. So, anything else? Drawings have all been given to by the National Trust to Tate. And
So she was pretty somebody special in her time.
Definitely. And she moved to Cornwall, it says here, in the 1940s, and became an acknowledged authority on the occult.
There you go.
And her book, The Living Stones, Cornwall, is about the interplay between humans and landscape, and it's been republished, was republished in 2016 with an introduction by Stuart Lee.
Well, Stuart Lee, the comedian.
Yeah.
Do you think he's funny then? Do you like Stuart Lee?
Well, I've been to see him a couple of times, actually. I remember one time I actually thought I might go and try and get his autograph.
Did you? How were you going to go and do that, Ian?
Well, I was thinking about whether, you kind of hang around back at the stage door, or
Like
you
a
kind of
bearded groupie.
Well, if I do want to get his autograph, how am I going to go about doing it? What are the practicalities? Because, it's not the kind of thing that I think probably people do on the same scale anymore anyway.
So, but why would you want to get his autograph?
I think it's just something, it just occurred to me, get his autograph. Why not? You go to book signings and you get people to sign the book, and then they give you the copy of the book and smile at you, and you kind of think, yeah, job done.
You've watched that person write something.
Well, that sounds a bit weird now.
Yeah,
It wasn't because I wanted to watch Stuart Lee write something. I think I just generally thought, oh yeah, you could just get an autograph there.
So go on then. Did you get his autograph?
Nah. I mean, just speaking to Steve then and reading up about Ethel Cahoon, we are just kind of getting a little bit of purchase on this man Crowley, but we're not really. I mean, maybe she'll be able to tell us something about him. I don't know. I mean, it just seems at the minute we just need to make we just need to make inroads into finding out a bit more about him.
Do a bit more research kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like go to the library.
Right,
maybe.
okay, very funny.
No, I'm serious. This time, honestly, I am absolutely serious. Let's go to the library and see what comes up. There might be something in there. We need some hard facts to go on here.
You know what, Graham? I'm beginning to get something which I hadn't quite realised before, and that there is something mystical about this landscape.
Yeah, there is. There is really something mystical about it. So what you got then?
Right. Well, I've got some books, obviously.
I can see, but what?
Right. Okay. They did have The Living Stones
Hey.
by Ethel Colquhoun. She, in her book, she said that Crowley only came to Cornwall once. It was in 1938, but she's saying August.
Ah.
Now, she kind of has it both ways. She says she never met him, but she did say by sheer coincidence in a bookshop that she came across him.
Okay.
I happened to be in a bookshop when he was there.
Right.
And she said she didn't sense any sense of evil about him, but he clearly wanted everyone to hear what he said. And she described him as looking like a not very well-off country gentleman.
Okay. So a man who wanted to be the centre of attention nonetheless.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, clearly you just get that little pen portrait. I got the impression that she didn't really think that he really was like the image that's portrayed.
No.
But the thing is that in terms of the timeline that we're looking at, it's a bit frustrating that she's saying August 1938 in Cornwall, so he was there, but not in May, and it doesn't place him at the cottage. So,
But he was in Cornwall that year,
yes, yeah,
so it's possible.
yeah. Well, we just don't have anyone
We don't
telling
have
us
anything
that.
to document it, no.
Now, there is something else which was completely unexpected but quite exciting.
Okay.
So they've got in their archives there some old recordings,
Okay.
and they've lent me this one to have a listen to. I'm just going to put it into the machine and so you can have a listen.
Okay.
Bury me in a nameless grave. I came from God, the world to save. I brought them wisdom from above, worship and liberty and love.
So what do you think?
Okay. Sounds like Winston Churchill.
Actually, we are listening to the great beast himself.
Oh, okay.
This is a recording of Aleister Crowley.
Whoa.
Let me play a bit more.
They slew me, for I did disparage therefore religion, law, and marriage. So be my grave without a name, that earth may swallow up my shame.
So what do you make of that?
Is it his own poetry? Is it his
Yeah.
own writing he's reading?
Yeah, he recorded poems that he'd written himself. Yeah.
Oh, it's interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? I didn't imagine that it would be so accessible, really.
Yeah, I mean, there is stuff which is described as Enochian as well, which is in a language which, well, it's not English, obviously. So there's some of that stuff as well.
Yeah.
But there are poems in English. And, I mean, you can sense the theatricality of him, can't you?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, and the description, a man who, to all intents and purposes, kind of came across as an ordinary person, but yet at the same time there was something charismatic, something that drew your eye and your attention.
And also, I guess, back in those years, because although there were recordings of music and things like that, but I suppose you must have had a reason for wanting to record your own voice for posterity.
Yeah, the sense of your own life beyond your life. a sense of importance, of a cultural significance of yourself.
It's a bit tantalising for me as well, because you kind of get a sense of him, but it's still, over all these decades and years that have gone by, is still a bit of a remote figure.
Yeah. But the photographs that we've seen of him, the staged and posed photographs, where he presents himself very much as the great sage, the great philosopher, but also at the same time a serious man, but also something in those images that are frightening and unnerving and designed to be so, I think. I mean, whether that's who he truly was or not, I don't know. Whether it was just an image he created for himself, you know, a way of publicizing himself and his philosophies and his religious beliefs, I don't know. But he's a fascinating character, isn't he? And you can understand how the myths have grown up around him.
One of the other things that was really helpful when I was chatting to Kath,
good old Kath,
was that she gave me this title, which is called Aleister Crowley in England. The author's Tobias Churton. And actually they told me that his 6th book about Crowley is due out any time now. So,
okay.
I mean, in terms of people that we might want to speak to, he just sounds like the person.
Yeah,
what
he
do you
sounds
think?
like a Crowley expert. He sounds like a man, or at least a man who's done an awful lot of research into Crowley. So, yeah.
And also the fact of, if he's written a book, Aleister Crowley in England, you'd kind of assume that he knew the movements of...
Interesting that he didn't include Cornwall in the title.
We'll take him up on that. Why don't we? Yeah,
let's take him up on that.
That could be your first question.
Yeah, it should say Aleister Crowley in England and Cornwall.
Are you making a nationalistic joke here?
I am.
Sorry, I completely went right over my head there.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I like it.
Yeah, cool.
Tobias Churton studied theology at Oxford, had success with the Channel 4 series Gnostics, and is a leading scholar in the field of Western esotericism. His books about Aleister Crowley detail his time in Germany, India, America, England and France. He depicts the so-called Great Beast as a sort of Renaissance man, an occultist, magician, poet, writer, and a painter who exhibited his work in Berlin, a man who befriended Man Ray and André Gide in Paris, a man who worked for the British and US intelligence agencies, a man who combined mountaineering and mysticism while he was in India. This does seem to be someone who lived an extraordinary life.
Yeah, no, I can remember it. I always do it in the voice Crowley did it in, because it just seems to work that way. Sort of, bury me in a nameless grave. I came from God, the world to save. I brought them wisdom from above, worship and liberty and love. They slew me, for I did disparage, therefore, religion, law, and marriage. So be my grave without a name, that earth may swallow up my shame. Well, that was him doing his Churchill, I think.
We've set up a video call with Tobias Churton.
Funny, I do find that people who know least about Crowley tend to call him Crowley, in my experience, which shows they haven't got... He even wrote a poem about this. He said, Crowley as in holy, not Crowley as in foully.
Who, like the subject of his books, appears on the screen as a larger-than-life figure.
So Crowley is another character. Crowley is the character of myth. He's the one that was regenerated into blackness by Dennis Wheatley, who should have known better, and by the popular press, and by John Simons in the 1950s and 60s with his biography, The Great Beast, which unfortunately is very readable, and it sounds very authoritative, but it is in fact a travesty. But Crowley was travestied from the time he was an undergraduate, practically, at Cambridge. It just seemed to be something that pursued him, that everything he did, it's slightly unusual, got him into trouble. You know, he's the guy, the man we'd love to hang, you know, that was the way John Bull described him, the man we'd love to hang, and they've been hanging him ever since, really.
Because they wanted to hang him because he was a challenge to the establishment then?
I think he represented a fundamental challenge to the values of a certain kind of British imperialist in the late 19th and for most of the 20th century in our country. His instinct was for I suppose you say today, a radical kind of freedom, i.e. that children shouldn't be ritually beaten in schools, which was normal in his day, that homosexuals shouldn't be put into hard labour, as was Oscar Wilde, and a lot of things that today are totally taken for granted. He was a kind of outsider. That's a word that was given to him by a great German art promoter who put Crowley's art in exhibition. In fact, he was the only British artist in the late Weimar period to have his own exhibition in Berlin. Crowley was a true decadent in the French sense of the French 1880s and 1890s period. He's really a kind of British Baudelaire. People may argue his poetry wasn't as good as Baudelaire's, and Crowley would agree. But the spirit of Baudelaire and the spirit of Crowley are very similar.
Man is so infinitely small in all these stars, determinate, maker and molder of them all. Man is so infinitely great.
We started this project by just researching an aspect of something that had happened near Zena in Cornwall, which has been attached to this myth of who Crowley is. The Tregethan horror stuff. You know about this?
Oh, God, I read it many years ago.
What do you make of it?
Well, I'm sure Paul Newman is. I mean, I think we did have some communication at one point. I think the book's sincere, but... it's one of those things, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. The entire Cornwall episode of Crowley's life boils down to one week summer holiday in the summer of 1938, where he went down to Newlyn and Paul and that area and Morva and explored around there because he was chasing two people. He was chasing Greta Sekira, who was a London socialite, very beautiful, who he was mad about. And she was quite an amazing lady herself. And he was after John Bland Jameson, who was an actor acting in Newlyn at the time, because Jameson had rented him his flat in Hasker Street in London, West London. And Crowley wanted him to pursue his magical studies properly, but Bland Jameson kept sort of freaking out. But Jameson promised him he would invest in one of his Crowley's pet projects at the time, which was a kind of clinic for rejuvenation. And he was only there for about 5 or 6 days. And other than that, he played with his son, Aleister Ataturk, as he liked to call him, which was Randall Gare, which was Patricia Doherty's son from Crowley, and playing with him on the rocks at Newlyn with their dog. And I can't remember the name of the dog, but a very friendly dog. And he was back before the whole trip was paid for by Frida Harris, who paid his train fare. Rather looked after him like you would an old relative.
So where do you think the Paul Newman? Where did this come from? This Tregethan horror story.
Well, I think if you read, the trouble is to read the book carefully and see where the Crowley bits have inserted and actually go rather cleverly sort of dovetail with the general story. You need to know a lot more about Crowley to see how it abuses the history. I can't say it's deliberate because I think that Paul probably looked at some of the diaries and some of the things, and it's as very easily the case, that old thing, connect, only connect. There's just too much connection, but actually when you analyze it, none of it connects. And to see him still being associated with witchcraft and covens and black magic and this sort of thing is just a joke for anyone who's studied the man and, like myself, spent a lot of time enjoyably among his papers. When I went through his private papers, diaries, letters, the stuff at the Warburg Institute in great detail over many years, I never felt once that I was in the presence of a disturbed or psychopathic or even dangerous character. He was just sheer delight to me. He wasn't into black magic. He liked the word magic because for him it meant the original science. And the original science, as he's understood it, talking about the magi, the magoi of ancient Iran, were the only science that was available in the world at that time. So when he talks about magic, he's talking about a form of science which involves perception of powers that are not recognized currently by materialist science. And you've got to remember the science that he was brought up on in the 19th century was entirely materialist.
Well, it's an extraordinary thing, isn't it? Then your version of him, from your researches, is so opposed to the popular image of him as this raging, egotistical delver into darkness and devilment. A hedonist who's out of control and a raging drug addict, not to be trusted. But this is the picture you're giving of him is, of course, much less tabloid than that.
That's the whole point. And I didn't. If I'd have wanted to write to make money out of this, of course, I'd have played up to I'd have written the rock and roll biography. Crowley and rock. Let's write about Jimmy Page and David Bowie and John Lennon and all these people. You have in Crowley really a tremendously glamorous and wayward personality, wayward in terms of he didn't do what Mummy told him. But I think you have a profound religious thinker. And on that, he would want to be judged, I think, ultimately. And so I think Crowley stands for every kind of genuine and sincere spiritual liberty.
And do you believe that is the reason that he's been so misrepresented and pilloried?
Difficult to think otherwise, I would say, given the evidence. Well, he said a wonderful thing in a letter to Gerald York in about 1944. He said, "I do not believe I'm a great man, but I've had a great work to do."
So we're back on the road for one final journey.
Yeah, our last journey, absolutely, and it's been one hell of a trip for me, anyway. I mean, I feel as if I've not only explored, I set out to explore with you this mystery story, and it's become actually an exploration of myself in lots of ways, as well as the subject material. I've learned a lot, I think, through the process of this. But actually, I think, for me, the most important thing is that we've kind of we've unwrapped the myth. We've identified the myth of what happened up at that cottage. We've, I think, told the truth about it, which is, in a way, much more mundane than a woman dying because she was confronted with an image of the devil conjured by Aleister Crowley in a cottage on the moor. I think we've, to a large extent, exploded that story and shown it to be a story that's grown up over time, that's been embellished from a much more mundane truth, really, that a woman died an unfortunate and tragic death in that cottage when she was there trying to help someone. But the most important thing of all for me has been that I hope that to some extent we've rescued Carr Cox from the myth, and we've disentangled her from Crowley and all the tabloidese, if you like, that has surrounded him over the decades. Because Carr Cox was quite an extraordinary woman. She led a marvellous life in so many ways and was responsible for so much good. She was, I believe, the first female magistrate in Cornwall. She and her husband Will were important in the establishment of the League of Nations, which became the United Nations eventually. So they had both local influence and they had enormous influence on an international stage too. And all of that goodness and what they brought to the world has been lost in this story of the occult and the events of the night at the cottage, which have been woven into something quite sensational, which have very little bearing on truth at all. So I hope more than anything else we've rescued her from that story, and perhaps people will now look at Carr Cox, if they get an opportunity to, in a very different way.
Yeah, and I think the same could be said for the Vaughan family as well, which were portrayed as kind of side players, but again, almost just represented as serving this mythical story about the consequences of Satanism, and so just kind of wheeled on. But in fact, their whole life that went on from there has been affected, and we heard as well how the next generation were affected by that story. It's not something that I can imagine that they would have wanted for the family, and it's just lingered. And for them, I guess, maybe wondering how can we dispel this? How can we? So I hope that in the case of the Vaughan family as well, that the truth of what actually happened will ensure that in the future people aren't so quick just to go with the sensationalist stories that have been told about them.
Yeah, and we can extrapolate out from that really to look at other aspects of the way our world works at the moment, where we're all prone through social media and so on, respond to sensationalism in stories. I mean, particularly, I love a sensationalist story, as you know. Well,
I was going to ask you this. Look, aren't you, having said what you've said, a bit disappointed that there isn't this unknowable, mysterious dimension to this story?
I was, along the way. There were times when I was disappointed. But actually, the journey's been very rich because it's taught me so much that actually inside the sensational story is a far more interesting story about the lives of real people, well-lived. And those well-lived lives need to be celebrated.
And there's not a little bit of you that still thinks, look, somehow, if I were to go up to the cottage, I'd find something that perhaps just couldn't be explained.
I think if we were to go up to the cottage now, and we had the courage somehow or other to open the door and walk in, I think what we would find in there, in our imaginations, would be all of the characters who we've discovered in the process of telling this story. I think for us, somehow or other, they would all be there. So whether they're there as ghosts or spirits or products of our imagination, to me, those characters will always inhabit that place.
So here we are again at the cottage.
We are.
Different weather this time though.
Back where we began, but yeah, this time in the pouring rain.
And I don't know whether it's just the weather or the dark clouds, but despite everything we've learned, it still looks as mysterious as ever.
Yeah, it's a glowering building, whatever the weather. It just is that way. And we kind of know now a lot of the characters, a lot of the people that we've met along the way who are associated with this place. And it's still spooky, isn't it? Whatever we've discovered, it's still a spooky place.
It does seem to have its place here in the landscape, and you just don't see it going away.
I kind of feel like we could just sort of open this door that we're standing outside of right now, Ian. We could open this door and a lot of the characters that we've met along the way will be waiting for us in there.
What a salesman. So you want us to go inside?
Well, we're here. This is as close as we've got.
Well, I mean, I can't deny I'm curious.
Yeah,
I am curious.
Good.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of...
But, you know, we've done the story and we found out what we wanted to find out.
Yeah.
And you found out some things you weren't expecting to find out.
Yeah, very much so. I don't feel like I need to go inside for this further podcast. I feel like I want to go inside for me, really.
Yeah.
So, come on is what I say. Let's do it. Let's take courage.
So you're now saying we've got to go inside.
I think we should take courage and do it. We should go for it. It's been a long journey to get us here.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree about that. And,
So,
you know, and we are on the threshold.
We are, so...
You know what? We've reached the end of this podcast, One Dark Night. For me and for Graham, it's been quite a journey.
Well, we've met some fantastic people and learned so much. But what's your verdict? Did we solve the mystery? Is there anything else you can tell us about this story? Was there anything we missed? It would be great to hear from you. We're already thinking about our next investigation and what that's going to be.
Maybe you've got a suggestion. And if you have, you can find us on social media with the handle One Dark Podcast.
Or email us at onedarkpodcast@gmail.com.
Please do get in touch. It'd be great to hear from you.
Thank you so much for listening. Until the next time.